Good morning, church. Good to see you this morning. Happy Mother's Day to our mothers. We are thankful for you. We appreciate you. We love you for what you have done for us. My mother passed away in 2020, and so Mother's Day means a little something different. My wife will tell you, I don't celebrate mothers. I let Ethan celebrate. In other words, I don't get Suzanne a gift for Mother's Day. Ethan calls that cheap. Matter of fact, we've already gotten a text from him this morning. There's a beautiful picture of our grandbaby in church, and we're thankful for that. And the message from Ethan was, make Daddy take you out to a nice place to eat. He's coming in 2 weeks. He can take her out. Which reminds us of Friends and Family Day that is coming up in 2 weeks. We hope that you will be here. We hope that you will stay for our fellowship meal afterwards. We'll have an afternoon service as well. Hope that you'll come. Hope that you'll bring folks with you and be a part of our Friends and Family Day. It'll be a great day, I do believe. Also, we've added 2 tracks this week to our track rack, and they are Be Patient and Dealing with Your Grief. So if you're going through grief, you know somebody that is. It's just a short little reminder of helps to help you go through your grief. And if you know of somebody that's not patient, you might want to give them this little track on Be Patient. And then as you hand it to them, you might want to walk off quickly because they might not be patient yet. But maybe they will after they read it. In 1908, matter of fact, May the 10th, 1908, a lady by the name of Anna Jarvis wanted to honor her mother for all that she had done for her. And so on that day, May the 10th, she passed out carnations, which were her mother's favorite flowers, to everyone in church. Well, that idea caught on. Civic groups, organizations, churches began to think of, well, that's a fitting thing to honor mothers. And so in May the 9th, 1914, some 6 years later, Woodrow Wilson signed a proclamation which declared that the second Sunday of May would be a day in which we would honor our mothers. That's so fitting for all that they've done and all that they mean to us, for what they've done with us and for us in raising us, and being there to help us, to guide us, to show us the way, to be true mothers. And when we think of that, and we think, well, you know, what can we say or what can we do? Because most of us, our children are already grown, and we're working on, so to speak, our grandchildren. But I thought today we might read about and talk about a story found in 1 Samuel, the first chapter, of a lady by the name of Hannah. Hannah was a great lady. Hannah was married to Elkanah, who also had Peninnah for a wife. Peninnah had children. Hannah did not. It caused great friction between the two because Peninnah would often tease and chide and be very coarse with regards to the way she treated Hannah because her womb was not open. Now, something we need to understand and probably do, but just simply need to be reminded, is that in biblical times, especially Old Testament, that a woman, if she was not with child or didn't have children, that she was considered to be one that maybe was something wrong with her, not from a physical standpoint, but from a spiritual standpoint. That God really hadn't blessed her, and because she hadn't lived the life that she should have lived, and that's the reason she didn't have children. And so you can imagine the teasing, you can imagine probably the coarse conversations that went on between Peninnah and Hannah. But nevertheless, yearly, Elkanah would take the family and they would go to Shiloh. Shiloh was the place where at that time the tabernacle was. It was the place during that time, during really the period of the Judges, where folks went to worship. So once a year they would make the trek and they would make it from their home base and they would make it to Shiloh and they would worship. When it came time for worship, Elkanah would give everybody what they needed in order to offer a sacrifice to God. But he so loved Hannah that he'd give her a double portion, twice as much. One day, Hannah probably had all that she could take from Peninnah. She was in Shiloh, and she was at, if you will, Eli, the priest, was at the door of the tabernacle and the post, and he heard Hannah. Well, heard is probably not is more of a misnomer than anything. Because Hannah was so stricken with the fact that she wanted a child that her heart was praying and her mouth was moving. No words were coming out of it. A devout, devoted, very sincere prayer asking God for a child. She's rebuked. She's told, why did you come here being drunk? No, I haven't drunk. I'm not drunk. And so she's told to go home. The priest tells her to go home, and the Lord will bless you. So she does. Elkanah, as the scripture says, knew his wife from the standpoint of conjugal rights, the husband, and she bears a son by the name of Samuel. Samuel she loved dearly. It was time then to go back to Shiloh, to go for the annual feast or the annual worship. And so she did. So Elkanah comes to her and says, it's time to go. I don't want to go till I wean him. Because you see, she'd made a promise. Her promise was that she was going to give her child, if God would give her a child, she was going to give that child back to God. And he would serve him all the days of his life. And then she made a Nazirite vow in which promised that his hair would never be cut. And she says, I'm not going back this year. And until he's weaned, I'm not going back to Shiloh. But then when he's weaned, I'll go back. Now, there's debate over at what age he was weaned. It was anywhere from probably a year old up until biblical times, depending upon the family, if you will, till about 12 years of age. So somewhere in that time frame, most folks say around 3 to 5. And then she carried him back. And she gave him back. Each year, she'd bring a coat, a new coat. Can you imagine the joy of each year going back and seeing her little boy and seeing how he'd grown and seeing the service that he was rendering to God and giving him that new coat for another year? A mother with great love, a mother with great character, a mother with great appreciation, a mother that really, except for the first 10 verses of the second chapter of 1 Samuel, which is a prayer, her story is pretty much just in the first chapter of 1 Samuel 1. But because of her good character, because of her godliness, she's a great example for us today to look at, to spend time thinking about how not just really mothers, but how all of us should be. When we think about Hannah, one of the first things we think about is the fact that she had faith in God. Each year, she and Elkanah and Peninnah and the whole family went to Shiloh. They went to Shiloh to worship, of course. But it was because of her faith. When she had trouble in her life, when she didn't have a child and she wanted a child, where is she? She's on her knees praying. And she's promising God, just give me a child. Just give me a child. I'll give him back. Just give me a child. Her prayer is devout. Her prayer is devoted. Her prayer is sincere. Her prayer is as much from the heart as any prayer that's ever been offered. But it's all because she trusted in God. In my distress, the psalmist said in Psalm 18 and verse 6, I called upon the Lord, and he heard me, and he answered my prayer. And that's what Hannah did. But Hannah did it all because she trusted in God, and she believed God, and she believed that God would help her. She believed that God would be of assistance to her. That God, in His care and in His providence, but in His power, that God who is able to do exceedingly abundant, Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20, that she could trust Him and she could turn it over to Him and He would do what He could for her. She believed that, she trusted that, and sure enough, that came to fruition, didn't it? She laid it before God. Here's what I need. Our faith in God is important. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. We read that in Hebrews, the 11th chapter. When we think about having faith, we think about trusting in God. But trusting is not just simply the idea, well, I trust Him. But I have all confidence. I have all assurance. I know that He will do exactly what He has said that He will do. I know that He will take care of me. Paul said that he knew whom he had believed, and he was persuaded that he was able to keep what He had committed to him, what He, God, had committed to him, what He, Paul, committed to who? He, God. You see, Paul understood and Paul knew the importance of trusting in God and having faith in God and realizing that it's upon God that we lay our burdens. I cannot bear the load of life unaided. I need Thy strength to lean myself upon. And so the psalmist reminds us in Psalm 31, verse 23, O Lord, all of His saints, for the Lord preserves the faithful. Love the Lord, all you His saints. For the Lord preserves the faithful, and plentifully rewards the proud doers. Trusting in God says, okay, I believe who you are. I believe not only that you exist, but I believe that you can take care of me. I believe that not only who you are, but you can take care of me and you can meet the needs that I have. And so, God, here's my life. I want you to lead my life in the way that it should go. You see, from every indication, Hannah wasn't just a one-time wonder. She wasn't just, I've come to visit today. Lord, I came to worship today. She was a faithful follower of God. She trusted in God. She believed in God. And as she had faith and trusted in God, it so molded and fashioned her life that she could be considered a godly woman. Failures, sure. Problems, sure. But nevertheless, one that had true faith and true trust in God. But second of all, Hannah worshiped God. Hannah was a worshiper of God. I remember as a small child being carried to church. Actually, as a small child, I remember being carried out more of church than I do in church because my mother and father believed that you sat still. I don't sit still today, but every once in a while, well, let me take that back. Once every service, we got to go out. And it wasn't to go out to play. Mother or father spanked me. There was one Sunday when I was an associate minister at Waverly. And Ethan was not sitting as still as I thought he should be. And I was upset. And I started to get up to take him out. And my sweet wife grabbed me and she said, "Don't kill him." We bring our children to worship for one reason, because of our faith in God. But we bring our children to worship because we understand the priority of worship and the priority of whom we are to worship. While the Bible tells us to worship, and the idea of worship is to give reverence to give homage to pay homage to the one who's given us all things, to pay homage to the one who is our creator, who is our sustainer. But the priority is not just in giving him that, because you see the text tells us, according to 1 Chronicles 29, verse 2, give unto the Lord the glory that is due his name. Bring an offering, come before the Lord. Psalmist says in Psalm 96, verse 4, great is the Lord and worthy to be praised. Psalm 146, verse 1, praise the Lord. Now we're to worship God. But our priority is not just, if you will, to worship, but to worship God. In Exodus chapter 20, Moses went up Mount Sinai and God gave him the tablets. And of course, remember, he ended up with 2 sets of the tablets. But in Exodus 20, he gave them the 10 commandments. And he told him, he says, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make any graven images. God's our priority in our worship. We studied not long ago on Sunday morning this very aspect, that God's a spirit and those that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. John 4. God is the priority of our worship, not us. You see, so many times we think, well, I just didn't get a lot out of this Sunday. I didn't get a lot out of that Sunday. And I didn't get a lot out of that preacher. And I didn't get a lot out of that message. A lot of it depends on what you bring with you, first of all. But second of all, what's your priority in worship? Is it what you get out of it or what you give to God? When Satan took Jesus into conference, if you will, in Matthew chapter 4, and he tried Jesus, he tempted him. And he told Jesus, he says, bow down and worship me. And Jesus told him what? He says, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. You're only going to worship God, not somebody else. You see, there's the priority of worship. Priority of worship is to worship God. That's what we believe Hannah was doing. When she'd go back to Shiloh, what was she doing? It was not necessarily to see everybody, and after Samuel was born, it was not necessarily to see him. Sure, she did, and sure, she loved it, and sure, she enjoyed it. But her priority was to worship God. And so while God is great and greatly to be praised, the privilege of prayer which we have is a privilege that we all have and we all honor. That privilege is to be done upon the first day of the week. You see, there's the priority of our week, isn't it? In Acts chapter 20 and verse 7, upon the first day of the week when the disciples came together to break bread, ready to depart, Paul preached to them on the morrow. See, Paul says it's time to preach. It's time to study. It's time to worship God. And so upon the first day of the week, the disciples came together. Now they came together to take the Lord's Supper, that memorial feast, that time in which our hearts and our minds go back to the cross and what was done for us. And as Ken so wonderfully and eloquently in his prayers this morning reminds us and reminded us, it in many ways should have been us and our cross. But Christ died for us. And so we're reminded that when we worship, we come together upon the first day of the week. Matter of fact, in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 1, upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store as God has prospered. Have you ever caught the aspect in 1 Corinthians 16 and in Acts 20 that the idea is not just every once in a while, but every week? Upon the first day of the week, upon the first day of every week is the emphasis there. If you go back to the original text, Greek text. But you come not only to worship God, and your priority, of course, our priority, of course, is to worship God, but it's also to encourage and edify one another. When we worship with the idea of glorifying God. But we know that when we come together, we come to worship God. as we edify one another. Paul would talk about our singing, wouldn't he, in Ephesians chapter 5 and Colossians chapter 3, and he'd talk about speaking yourselves in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your hearts to the Lord. Teaching in Ephesians 5 and admonishing. We sing, when we sing, we teach and admonish one another. And so Paul talked about, in 1 Corinthians 14, he was talking about worship there and how that really, if you go back, it's the spiritual gifts there, chapter 12, chapter 13 is a more excellent way, and he's talking about love, chapter 14 then. He's basically talking about how their service had become a very disruptive thing. Oh, there was those speaking in tongues, there was those interpreting, there was those that were prophesying, there were those that were doing these spiritual gifts, and they were doing, and worship had gotten where it was just a madhouse. And Paul limited it. Why? Because he wanted worship to be what would edify. And so he said in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 26, he says, let all things be done to edification. In other words, he says, let your worship be such that you get something out of it, that you are encouraged, that you are lifted up. But remember who your priority is. It's not you, it's God. And so Hannah, when she came together, she went to worship God. But then thirdly, she loved her family. She loved her husband loved her. How do we know that her husband loved her? Well, go back to the fact that Elkanah said, I give you a double portion. And he says, am I not enough for you? And basically she says, no, I want a child. But then every year she carried that little fellow a coat. She loved him. She loved her family. Yes, we have mothers in our society today that are not new. They're like every other mother of every other time. There are folks in our society that have children but do not care for their children for whatever reason. Maybe it's for some, it's the fact that they can't. They do not have that aptitude. For others, there are financial situations. For others, there's other reasons. And I don't know about all of your mothers and all of your upbringings. I had a mother that, really loved me. We sat in church as kids and we had pens. And you know how you get ink off of a kid's hands? Spit. Mama spit, right? Well, we got that. We got the fact that we were told to be quiet. And I could sit anywhere in church that I wanted to. But there were two choices. You either sit with your friend and his or her parents, or you sit in front of me. And Mom and Dad sat about as close as Suzanne sitting now. They sat close. So you know what? We sat in the front. And the reason that us kids sat in front at church is because I had to sit in front of Mom and I didn't want to sit with her and Dad. Mother believed in loving her children. She made sure that we were clean. She made sure that we were respectful. She made sure that we were respected. She made sure that we always had our homework and that we always had our Bible class lessons. She made sure that we understood that we were loved and cared for. When we as Christians become Christians, we're born again. In John chapter 3, that was really the question, the sticking point, if you will, with Nicodemus. How can a man be born again? Can he enter into his mother's womb a second time? And Jesus said, unless a man is born of the water and the Spirit, he cannot see God. And we look at baptism, we say it's a birth. But what do we mean by birth? Well, we mean just that when one is baptized in Jesus Christ and comes out of the water, they're a new creature. A new beginning. Starts all over. but we're born into a family. The church, family, we, us, that meet within inside these four walls, we are family. We want to see each other and be with each other and enjoy one another. But more importantly, we love one another. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples if you have what? You could probably finish it. Love one for another. John 13, verse 34. As part of the family, we love each other. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's understand that it means several things. It means not only that you love me, but that you like me. Right? I had a man tell me one time, he says, I love you, I just don't like you. I said, well, I've heard that from my wife before. But no. I said, well, that's interesting. Because like is part of love. Now, you may not like everything that I do. You may not like what I like. I like chocolate pie. You may not. You might like lemon icebox pie. I like that too, but you might like that better. If we go to a restaurant and we choose between steak and chicken, you might choose steak and I might choose chicken. You might drive a Chevrolet and I might drive a Nissan Altima. We have different likes. But it doesn't mean that we don't like each other. And so when we're born in the family, we learn to love each other, to have a family of God that truly cares about one another. And so Paul says, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind. Let each esteem others better than themselves. Philippians chapter 2. You see, we learn to like each other. We learn to be part of a family that cares for one another. We learn to be a family that shares and does for each other. Have you heard the story of Mickey and Percy? Mickey and Percy were dogs. They were different parents, but brought into the same household by a loving lady. Mickey and Percy got along great. They actually were alike with regards to breed and just adored one another. One day, Mickey got sick. And the owner thought Mickey had died. And so she gathered Mickey up and she went and she buried Mickey in the backyard. Percy could not stand it. She moaned and wailed. She was lonely, and wasn't just seemingly too long before she went out and she came back in. She dug up Mickey, and Mickey was alive. In church, we write off people way too fast. We got to remember we're family that loves and likes and cares for and supports one another. And so Hannah teaches us this great lesson of loving your family and loving them well. But then also, she had a godly character. Yeah, she was accused of being drunk, which she says she was not. She had godly character in that she approached God. She prayed to God to ask for a child. She had great character that was godly in that she made a vow to God. You give me a son, I'll give him back. Boy, how many of us wanting that for so long, once we get it, we say, God, I know I made that deal, but not going to do it. Maybe she knew Deuteronomy 23. If you make a vow to God, you got to keep it. If not, you'll be charged with a sin. Maybe she knew that. Maybe it's also not only knowing that, but being the type of woman that she was. One that truly loved God and trusted God and feared God because she was godly. What's godly? Well, godly is the idea of being like God. Well, preacher, we can't be like God because we're not God. I understand that, but isn't that supposed to be one of our ambitions? 1 Timothy chapter 6. That we're to pursue righteousness and godliness, faith and love. Paul lists several things there, but we're to pursue number 2 on the list, godliness, to be like God, to strive to be like God. I don't know about that. Well, I know that the striving is a whole lot different than the getting there, right? And Paul just said, pursue, go after, do the best that you can to be like God, to do what God would have you to do. But, preacher, sometimes I'm sort of like Paul in Romans chapter 7. You know, in Romans chapter 7, Paul said the things that I should do, those I don't, and the things that I shouldn't do, those are the things that I do. Boy, if ever Paul was right in what he said, in Romans chapter 7, he sure hit Paul Daugherty. But you keep reading, and in the 8th chapter, he says, therefore there is now no condemnation to those that are in Christ Jesus, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. In other words, these are the ones that become more godly. These are the ones that are striving to do what God would have them to do. You see, in a world of darkness, in a world of sin, we shine as lights. But we shine as lights to be lights to the world. Paul said that we're to do all things without murmuring or complaining in Philippians chapter 2. But the reason being so that really we might shine as those lights. That we might be what God would have us to be. That we might be the godly person that God would have us to be. And so Paul would write Timothy and he would say, let no one despise your youth, but be an example. And then he lists several things in word, in conduct, in charity, in spirit, faith, and purity. Paul would say, live your life, but live it godly. Live it with great character. In a world that has no character, but is full of characters, let us be individuals that have the character of God. You may have heard, but may not known, it's been many years ago actually now, Stan Smith. Stan Smith was a professional tennis player. Arthur Ashe, also a famous tennis player, was playing Stan Smith at the time. There was a ball that the umpire ruled out, but Stan Smith said no. Arthur hit that ball and it's in. And so he went and sat down. Arthur had won the point. He had lost, and he had lost that game. People couldn't believe that Stan Smith would do that. That he would actually overrule the umpire, but in a ruling that would go against himself. And Arthur Ashe said no. Said that's the kind of character that Stan Smith has. And if it was in, he truly believed that it was in. And he wouldn't take an umpire's answer, even though it was in his favor. Godly character says, I want to be as much like God as I possibly can be. And so Hannah had that godly character to live life. Oh, we thank our mothers, we love our mothers, we appreciate our mothers for all that they mean for us and all that they mean to us. We're thankful for the ones that have already passed on and gone to their reward. We're thankful for what they've done for us. For the spankings we got, for the meals prepared by her hands, for the discipline that was rendered and for the life that was corrected, for a love that pointed us in the right direction, that made sure above all things that my sister and I loved the Lord. She never told us, you live this way because your daddy's an elder. She told us, you live this way because you're a Christian. And we tried to do that and still are trying to do that to the very best of our ability. Thank you for what you do. May we all try to be more like Hannah in every aspect of our life, male or female. This morning, if you're not a New Testament child of God, if you need to come and put your Lord and Savior on in baptism for the remission of your sins, or you need to come and rededicate your life, our prayer is that you'll come. All together we stand and sing.